Hello and welcome to another Edexcel iGCSE Computer Science past paper question. This is paper 1, Principles of Computer Science, also known as the theory paper. This is November 2021. There's some information here on the first page, so in your exam this will be printed off for you. You will write your answers on this paper in black ink. You will not be able to use a calculator and you will not need a computer. So, total marks out of 80, so add that to the 80 from paper 2, which will give you a total aggregate mark out of 160. So, with all that said, let's jump in and get started. But before we do, please like this video and press the subscribe. Thanks very much. Let's get started. Question 1. Computers use binary to represent and store data. Binary and hexadecimal notation can be used to represent numbers. Convert the denary number 77 to 8-bit binary. Now, the easiest way to convert between number bases, so base 2 to base 10, base 16, is to just use this table. 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. That represents 8 bits, 1 byte. 8 bits or 1 byte is the largest number you'll have to deal with in the GCSE exam, iGCSE exam. So to do the conversion, I create the table. Now, if this was my exam, I'd have drawn lines there, lines between the placeholders, 128, 64, etc. But I don't need to do that here because I'm just going to write on this. So what I need to do is go through each of these values, each of these placeholder values, and say to myself, do I need 128? Does it go into 77? If I need it, I place a 1 there. If I don't need it, it's a 0. So I don't need 128 because that doesn't go into 77. I do need 64. So that goes into 77. 64 plus 32 would be 96, which is too much. I don't need that. 64 plus 16 would be 80. So I don't need 16. I do need 8. So 8 plus 64 is 72. Plus 4 is 76. So all I need now is a 1. And one way to check if I've got it right, 77 is obviously an odd number, so there should be a 1 placed in place value, placeholder 1. Now, you need to be able to do that without a calculator, so you need to spend some time to practice these and get used to doing quick additions without a calculator. These are what I would call easy questions, and you don't want to be getting these wrong. So that is 2 marks there. Question 2. Convert the denary number negative 126 to 8-bit binary using 2's complement. So I'll link to a video where I cover 2's complement. It's not that hard. Just flip the bits and add 1. That's what we're going to do now. So we're going to represent 126 as a binary number. So I've done that. 64 plus 32 plus 16 plus 8 plus 4 plus 2 is 126. Now I'm going to flip the bits, so zeros become ones, ones become zeros. So I've flipped the bits. So now I'm going to add 1, and I'm looking on the right hand side here, 2 and 1. So I've got 1, so if I add 1 to that, I now get 2, so that'd be 1, 0. So there is my answer. Just simply flip the bits and add 1. Now, if you want to check your answer, if you look at it logically, so we've got negative 128, because we're looking at the most significant bit there, 128, that's a 1, so it's negative 128. If we add 2 to that, that would be negative 126. So that is the correct answer, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0 there. 3. Convert the binary pattern 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0 to hexadecimal. Now this is easy if you remember that hexadecimal is 2 nibbles. So 2 4-bit nibbles. And if I split that number into 2 4-bit nibbles, treat it like that, then I can very easily do the conversion. So here you can see I've drawn out my table, 128, 64, 32, etc. And I've placed the bit pattern into the table, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. So now what I need to do is to split that in half and do the 2 4-bit nibbles. So now I've done that, I simply drop my bits down and do my conversion. Now I've dropped the bits down, and just be careful to keep them in the correct column, otherwise you're going to have problems. So I'm going to say 8 plus 4 is 12. So 12 is C. Remember, A is 10, B is 11, 12 is C in hexadecimal. And then we do the other number. So 4 plus 2 is 6. So the finished answer is C6. So that is the finished answer there. So remember, treat a hexadecimal number like two numbers, two 4-bit numbers. So it is C6. So if that was, for example, 86, it wouldn't be 86, it would be 86. So that finished answer is C6. B. Images are stored as binary data. A bitmap image is 400 pixels wide by 200 pixels high. Its color depth of 12 bits. Construct an expression to show how the image and size in bytes is calculated. Do not calculate the answer. So it's important to note that we do not calculate the answer, because you won't be getting any marks for that. We haven't got a calculator anyway, so you're just writing an expression. So it's simply the width times the height multiplied by the color depth, which in this case is in bits, it's 12 bits. So that could be anything in bits from 1 bit up to possibly 16 bits. So it's 400 times 200 times 12. Now, that would give us the file size in bits. To get it into bytes, we need to divide it by 8. And there's my answer, and that will give me the file size in bytes if I were to calculate that. 2. Figure 1 is an image of an icon set out in an 8 by 8 pixel grid. So that's figure 1. A run length encoding compression algorithm uses W for white, B for black to give the result of compressing the first 4 lines of the icon using the algorithm. So with run length encoding, what we're doing is counting the number of white pixels, the number of black pixels, and writing that down. So in the first line, it would be 3W, 1B, 4W. So that means 3 white pixels, 1 black pixel, and a further 4 white pixels. So what we don't do is put all the white pixels or the black pixels together. We need to represent it exactly. So that's what that would look like. 3W, 1B, 4W. Now you can write W3, B1, W4, but I think I prefer to write it this. So the number followed by the what the pixel is, black or white. So on line 2, we can see 1W, 1 white pixel, then followed by a further 6 black pixels, so that's 6B, and then 1 white pixel at the side. So there is line 2 done. So there's lines 3 and lines 4 done, following the same principle. 3. Run length encoding is a type of lossless compression. State what is meant by the term lossless in this context. So lossless means it doesn't lose any data on compression. So no data is lost on compression of the file, whereas with lossy, we would lose data permanently on compression of the file. Well, this is an interesting question. We haven't seen too many like this before, looking at the conversion of an analog sound wave into digital. So Raoul wants to record a song and store it as a digital sound file. Figure 2 shows an overview of the process of recording a song and storing it as a digital sound file. So they've got Raoul singing into the mic. Then we take that sound wave, convert it into an electrical current. So we see on the x-axis is seconds, on the y-axis is amplitude. So what we do is quantize that sound wave. So we take measurements at different points, and those points are converted into binary, and there is our binary representation of the sound wave, the digital representation of the sound wave. So you notice along the x-axis we've got, can represent there, we've got 2 samples per second. So that's a sample rate of 2 Hertz. Hertz represents samples per second. So how does that work then? We sample the analog sound at different points. Our number of samples per second is measured in Hertz or kilohertz. We measure or quantize that amplitude. so the different samples. We convert that value into binary, we store data as sample rate and values, and that's how we convert an analog sound wave into digital. Number 2, Raoul uses a lossy algorithm to compress the file. Give one reason why sound quality of the compressed file may not be as good as the uncompressed version. Well, when any file is compressed, you lose data. So here's my answer. Some audio information is lost during the compression process, and it's important to note that audio information, that data, is lost permanently. So that completes question 1 for a total of 16 marks. Question 2. Danielle manages network security for a small business. A. Identify one action Danielle could take to protect the network from unauthorized access. So A, B, C, or D. The correct answer is B. For unauthorized access, she needs to enforce a strong password policy. None of the other answers fit that question. B. Danielle has received this email. She is a customer of safepayment.com but thinks this is a phishing attempt. A phishing attempt is where a fraudulent organization or person will send you an email pretending to be from a bank or finance company or perhaps even social media account and want you to log in, and it will record your details. So this is a phishing attempt, and she's highlighted where she thinks there's a problem. So dear customer, as not personalized, she's highlighted dear customer there. And the question is, give one reason why use of these words might make Danielle suspect that the email is a phishing attempt. Well, it hasn't given her full name. So if you think if it was from safepayment.com, it should have known her name. As a customer, it should know her name. It shouldn't say dear customer. It should say dear Danielle or dear her surname. So the email should be addressed to Danielle by her name. Question 2, draw circles around 2 other aspects of the email that might make Danielle suspect it's a phishing attempt. 2 marks. So these are the 2 things that I've picked out. So look at the top one there, 5AFE. So instead of an S, it's a 5. And spelling mistake, typo. So hopefully a professional organisation, a payments organisation that deals in finance would not be making typos, little typos like that. That would look very poor. So that's the other thing that I've noticed there as well. You'd also have, please use this link to log in, check your account. So as soon as you click on the link and you type in your details, they'll then be recorded by the fraudulent organisation and used for their own financial gain. C. Some employees use company laptops in public places. Danielle is concerned that shoulder surfing could pose a risk to security. Describe what is meant by shoulder surfing. So shoulder surfing in the classic sense is at a cash point where someone looks over your shoulder to look at your PIN number as you put it in, which is why cash points have mirrors in them, or they have lines. Please stand behind this line while you're waiting to be served. So shoulder surfing is trying to find out someone else's password. So it might not necessarily be someone looking over someone's shoulder. It could be hidden cameras, could be spyware installed, but basically a hacker spies on the user of an electronic device to obtain their personal identification number, PIN number, or login information. So how can we prevent this? Question 2, we can tilt the screen away. We can use screen filtering so other people can't spy on us. We can sit where the information is not going to be seen by CCTV or drone cameras. We can also make the password extra long so it isn't memorable. It's not easy to make a mental note of it or write it down. So any of those for 2 marks. So there's some possible answers. You only really need 1, as long as you've got 1 and an explanation. So for example, use a screen privacy filter so that anyone not sitting directly in front of the screen can see it, then you're going to get your 2 marks. D. Danielle wants to protect the network from cyber attacks. Identify the purpose of penetration testing. Question 1. So the answer is B, to identify security vulnerabilities. So penetration testing is where white hat hackers hack into the system to identify security vulnerability. So they'll be paid by the organization, employed by the organization to hack into the system to find where the weak points are. 2. Danielle is sent a software patch for the network operating system but is too busy to install it straight away. Explain why this delay could pose a threat to the security of the network. So unpatched software has known weaknesses which can be exploited by a hacker. So when Windows XP stopped being supported by Microsoft in April 2014, they said that if you were going to continue to use Microsoft XP, and it was a very popular operating system at the time, still is, still used by some people, you should not be using a network, you should not be using the internet, because you leave yourself open to security weaknesses which can be exploited by a hacker. So a hacker will know where the weak points are and they'll exploit that to gain access and to hack into your system. So that completes question 2 for a total of 11 marks. Question 3. Carlo uses his smartphone to make hands-free calls from the car. A. The smartphone connects to the car using wirelessly, forming a network. Complete the table by adding a tick to indicate the type of network and a tick to indicate the usage model that the network uses. So we've got network type, is it LAN, WAN or PAN, and the model client-server or peer-to-peer. In terms of network type, it is of course a PAN, personal area network, because it's a very small network. And the usage model, the model of the network, is peer-to-peer. It isn't client-server, it's just simply peer-to-peer. Just a simple peer-to-peer network. B. Data on a network is transmitted between devices using packets and the TCP/IP layered protocol stack. Complete the table by naming 2 layers of the stack and giving one function for each of the layers you have named. So at GCSE level, there are only 4 layers that we need to memorize for the exam. There's more than 4 layers, but we need to only memorize 4. And they are application, transport, internet/network, and data link layer. And I create a mnemonic ATIL to help my students remember that in the exam, ATIL. So perhaps we'll start with the first one, application layer and its function. Now think of application like app. So we're thinking about a browser would be a good example here. So Chrome, Safari, Firefox, etc. What does it do? Selects and uses the correct protocol to transmit data, and it interacts with the user. So second one, I'm just simply going to go with transport. So that's the A and the T. What does that do? It identifies the correct server port to use. It identifies the client port to use, divides data into packets, numbers the packets, passes the packets to the network layer. I will leave a link to a very short animation about the packet switch network, but you do need to learn that for the exam, what the packet switch network is. So you could also have network layer, which adds the source sender's IP address, adds the destination IP address. You could have data link layer, controls the physical connections between pieces of hardware, adds MAC addresses to the packets, sends the packets on their way. As long as you've got 2 of those, that would be, and 2 good descriptions of that would be 4 marks. C. The smartphone can communicate using Wi-Fi. Identify which one of these is a radio frequency used by smartphones to connect to Wi-Fi. Is it 2.4 GHz, 3 kHz, 4.1 GHz, or 5 kHz? It is, of course, A, 2.4 GHz. And again, you need to memorize for the exam. That is the smartphone frequency band. D. Carlo's smartphone can use 3G, 4G and 5G mobile communication standards. Give one advantage of using a higher frequency band for mobile communications. A higher frequency gives greater bandwidth and is less prone to interference. 2. For 2 marks, explain one benefit to Carlo of using 5G rather than 3G. Well, 5G gives Carlo more waves per second and therefore faster responses to his connections, allowing Carlo to move and download data in a shorter time. So it's faster and a greater bandwidth as well, so he can download data in a shorter time, and that's the advantage of 5G over 3G. E. Carlo wants to reduce the environmental impact of his smartphone. Give one way Carlo could reduce energy consumption. So what wastes the battery then? Well, not closing apps when not in use. Reducing screen brightness could reduce energy consumption. Unplug the charger when not in use. So perhaps not leave it charging overnight. Just charge it for as long as it needs during the day, a couple of hours, and then unplug it rather than leaving it for 8 hours overnight, which isn't very environmentally friendly. So number 2, explain one way, rather than reducing energy consumption, that Carlo could reduce the environmental impact of his smartphone. Well, if he kept his smartphone for longer, say longer than 2 years, then that would reduce e-waste. So for 2 marks, I've written keeping his smartphone for longer would reduce e-waste because it doesn't need to go into it's obsolete. It's reducing the electronic waste, which is a positive environmental impact. So that completes question 3 for a total of 13 marks. Question 4. Algorithms can be used to perform calculations and process data. State what is meant by the term algorithm. Classic exam question this. A set of instructions, not sequence, a set of instructions. It's not a sequence of instructions, it's a set of instructions to perform a task with a finite number of steps. Now, apologies, I've had to zoom out to see this. This is a full flow chart. It's an algorithm. And what you're going to do is trace this through. So you've got start, number equals 1, number 2 equals number 1, etc. Then it outputs number 1, number 2. So we're going to trace this through. So here's our trace table, and it does say you may not need to use all the rows. So you've got number 1, number 2, number 3, count, output, count equals 2, question. So that all links to what is going on in this flowchart here. So all the variables are listed in the trace table, and what a trace table does basically is describe what is stored in variables in different points in the program. That's all that's doing. So it's sometimes called a dry run. What effectively you're doing is running the program without having written any code. So you're testing if logic actually works. So see at the first line there, we've got number 1 is assigned the variable 1, number 2 equals number 1, so number 2 is going to be 1. There's no number 3 yet. Output number 1, number 2, that is 1, space 1. Count equals 0, okay, and then decision, is count equal to 2? If it's yes, then we stop. If it's no, then we carry on. So we're going to carry on here. So count is not equal to 2, it's 0, so we're going to carry on and complete the next line. So we're going to output number 3, and number 3 is number 2 plus number 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2, so I'm going to type that in number 3. So number 1 equals number 2, so number 1 will contain the contents of number 2, which is 1 currently. Number 2 equals number 3, so number 3 contains 2, so number 2 will now contain 2. Count equals count plus 1, so count is now 1. So we haven't finished, we're going to iterate back. Count equals 2, no it doesn't, so we continue. Number 3 equals number 2 plus number 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3, so that's now number 3. Output number 3, done that. Number 1 equals number 2, so number 1 is now 2. Number 2 equals number 3, so number 2 now becomes 3. Count equals count plus 1, so we now increment the count by 1, that's number 2. One thing I didn't do was complete the output column, which I should have done, because you're getting marks per column, so that would have given me 4 marks for getting that right. I need to complete the output column, so I should have output to number 3 there, so there should be 2 in the second row and 3 in the third row. So we haven't quite finished. We iterate around. Is count equal to 2? That is now true, so we need to put true in the count equals 2 column. And then we can stop. Now, I would put true or false in there rather than Y or N because that's what's written in the first row. Now, you notice that I didn't, in the count equals 2, I didn't fill in the second row. I don't need to, because if the value hasn't changed, I don't need to fill that in. You can if you want to, you don't need to. So that completes that for 5 marks. It's just important to note that you're getting marks per column rather than per row. So as long as you get the column right, you're going to get the marks for these questions. So you get guaranteed to get a question like this in your paper 1. You're getting marked per column. So make sure that you trace it through carefully. You take your time on it, because one small mistake can snowball through and then you're going to get the rest of it wrong. So take your time over something like this and think it through logically. Follow the flow chart. Number 2, the benefits of using a trace table include that they allow variable states, outputs and decision to be recorded. Give one other benefit of using a trace table to test an algorithm. Well, it helps to detect logic errors. That's the main reason. So there's my answer for that one. C, an algorithm is needed to count and display the number of vowels in a word. Vowels are A, E, I, and U. A, E, I, O, U. The completed algorithm must count the number of vowels, create a message as a single string, e.g. there are a number of vowels, print the message to display. Now you've got a partly completed algorithm here, and you need to complete the rest. So we've got set word to elephant there. We're going to describe our variables. So we're going to need a count to count the number of vowels. So I'm going to set my count initially to be 0 at the start. And I'm going to work on the for each letter from word do, the for loop there. Now this is an if, so it's a selection now. If letter equals A, that's lowercase, quotation marks, or, so it's Boolean logic there, or letter equals E, or I, or O, or U, then, now I've gone off the page there, but in your exam, make sure you write it a little bit more neatly than that. So if it meets those conditions, then we add 1 to the count. Now, we set count to count plus 1, and by the way, this should be indented, and this should be indented. But I've gone into the do not write in this area bit there, okay? But just for the purpose of indentation, it should look like that. Count is incremented by 1. Then we do an end if. Then we've got our end for each. So unlike in Python, we need to have an end if. We don't have that in Python. We just have else or elif, and we don't have for each. So we don't end that in Python, but in pseudocode we do. So after that, we just simply need to provide an output and send all these to display. So remember, an output in pseudocode is send, the number of vowels is ampersand and count to display. So it's send the number of vowels is and the contents of count to the display. And that completes question 4 for a total of 12 marks. Question 5. Computers can be general purpose or specific purpose machines. A. The central processing unit, CPU, is responsible for executing a program. Figure 4 shows some hardware components of a computer system. Complete the table by matching the components to the letter shown in Figure 4. So we can see our inputs, process and output there. And we can see that we've already got the registers labelled C. We've got cache already labelled F. And the clock labelled A. So we'll start with perhaps E, our input device. So E is our input device. And we'll look at G, which is our output device. So we've already got clock labelled A, so let's look at B. What is B? B is a control unit. So I'm going to label control unit B. So these are all parts of the CPU. So in the CPU we have a control unit. So what about main memory? Where's that? Well, we can see that in H. There's got an input and then an input output there. It's a double-headed arrow. So that is H. That is main memory. So all that's left then is D. and D is the arithmetic and logic unit. So could B and D have been labelled the other way around? Well, no, not really, because B, which is a control unit, needs to have the clock. So that is the clock speed of the CPU. So that needs to have that input there to B. Okay, we can see the other obvious things there. E and G are obviously input and output, input, process, output, and H is some kind of storage. And in this case, the storage is main memory or RAM. B, the CPU runs a fetch, decode, execute cycle, FDE cycle. 1. Some registers within the CPU are general purpose, whilst others perform a specific function. One register is a program counter. Its function is to keep track of the next instruction to be fetched. Describe how it does this. 2 marks. So it stores the memory address for the next instruction, and the memory address is incremented during the fetch process. 2. The control bus carries signals from the processor to other components. Identify the signal that would be used during the fetch stage of the cycle. Is it A, B, C, or D? The correct answer is B. It's not A or C because no such signal exists, and it's not D because that doesn't happen during the fetch stage of the cycle. 3. Clock speed is the number of pulses of the CPU clock per second. State how increasing the clock speed impacts the fetch, decode, execute cycle. Well, it processes more instructions in the same amount of time. C. An embedded system forms part of a larger system, device or machine. Give 2 features of an embedded system. Well, it's a system with only a few specific instructions, so whilst it's a computer, it only does certain things, so it's only programmed to do a certain amount of things. So, for example, in a washing machine, control the spin cycle, for example. Also, its functionality cannot be changed or upgraded by users. It's also going to have very little or no output, so no kind of VDU or display from it. Might have one, but it'd be very, very simple. So it is a computer, but it's a computer designed to only do a specific thing. So think about, you've got them in your car, you've got them in a washing machine, etc. 2. There are many factors to consider when choosing a CPU for an embedded system. For example, the clock speed of a CPU in a TV remote control can be low because it only has to be fast enough to create a low frequency output signal for the TV. Explain one other factor that should be considered when choosing a CPU for an embedded system within a TV remote control. The performance only needs to be adequate enough for the task, otherwise it would be a waste of power. It doesn't need to be super power, it just needs to do the job. You can also have the RAM can be limited or very small, because it's only holding a limited number of instructions. Only needs a small bus width, because output signals are serial binary. So that completes question 5 for a total of 13 marks. Question 6. iGCSE develops software programs. iGCSE can use a low-level or high-level programming language to write code. Give one benefit of using low-level programming language to develop a program. I put faster translation and execution. You can also have allows her to directly address components, make efficient use of available memory space, can dispense with the need for an OS to make the code run faster, free up memory space as well. 2. Give one drawback of using low-level programming language to develop a program. It is hardware specific. It's also very difficult to understand, and it can be very time-consuming to write. So any one of those for 1 mark. B. iGCSE is writing an antivirus program. The program will include a virus removal function. Give 2 other functions that should be included. Well, it should have real-time scanning. It should also be able to quarantine files. It should be able to identify threats, schedule scans, on-demand file scanning as well. 2. An antivirus program is one type of anti-malware. Give another type of anti-malware. For anti-spyware, we can also have anti-adware as well. C. iGCSE is working on a burglar alarm system. The alarm must be triggered if the alarm A is set, it's dark outside O, a window W, or a door, D, has been opened. Construct an expression using and or not with the letters A, O, W and D to show the conditions that will trigger the alarm. So start with A, we want A, and then O, so alarm set and dark outside O. So A and O, also got W or D, so we want and W or D, and we'll need to bracket those. Now there should be brackets around W or D because they're together. So window or door has been opened, so you do need to bracket those, and you're going to get a mark for bracketing those. So A and O and W or D, so one of the conditions is met, either W or D, and that is 4 marks. That's my Boolean expression. Question D, iKiko wants to know how the software she writes can be protected. Discuss how the software can be protected from illegal copying and or illegal distribution. You should consider intellectual property and licensing, 6 marks. Now you can write a plan for this, 6 marks. You get 2 hours in these exams, so you can plan your answer out. Remember to write a conclusion at the end. So let's start with intellectual property, then we'll move on to licensing. Intellectual property is any work that is distinct, owned and protected by patent or copyright laws. iKiko software programs fall into this category. She'll be able to protect her intellectual property. Her software is protected by law without her having to apply for it. So let's look at licensing now. Okay, with licensing, purchasing the software does not mean that you own it. So when you purchase software, you purchase a license, you don't actually purchase the software. You could add a license key to the software, so the software has to have a license to be able to run, and compulsory registration using the internet. So you might have a key, it might all be linked with that. You log on and you create the key using the internet when you license your software. Could allow proprietary licenses which do not allow for code modification, which is opposite of open source, which allows the user to modify the code. Creative Commons allows free distribution of copyrighted work and would use if iKiko wanted to allow people to share, use and build on the programs. And that completes that question there. So with a descriptive question like that, we don't necessarily need a conclusion. We're not evaluating. With an evaluative question for this, you would need to write a conclusion. So although I said before you need a conclusion, it's not necessarily needed for a kind of descriptive question like this. We're describing it, not evaluating it. So that completes question 6 for a total of 15 marks, and that completes the whole paper for a total of 80 marks. Once again, thanks very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments how you get on. Good luck with your exams if you're taking them this summer, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.